All right, join us for our expanded conversation on the crisis in Iraq at the top of the hour. How involved should the U.S. be? We'll ask our experts. That's straight ahead, 3 o'clock Eastern time. All right, the National Center for Civil and Human Rights opens in Atlanta tomorrow. It's a museum using events of the civil rights movement and putting them in a global human rights context. Victor Blackwell takes us inside and talks with some of the people who helped make it a reality.
We will use the same tactics that we have used before.
Bull Connor and President Johnson.
Their cause must be our cause, too.
Together, part of a comprehensive look at America's fight for equality inside the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta. The $80 million facility honors the well and lesser-known stories and faces of the civil rights movement. One of them, Henry Thomas.
I was immediately impressed.
Thomas was just 19 years old in this mugshot. He was a freedom rider during the summer of 1961, demonstrating for civil rights throughout the South. His is one of many covering the center's replica of the burned-out bus he traveled on.
There is a face now to those people who made that sacrifice 53 years ago. They are my heroes. I am proud of them.
With over 40,000 persons already assembled on the ground.
The center is filled with the images and sounds of the era and an interactive exhibit that mimics the taunting and kicking protesters endured during the lunch counter sit-ins. Doug Shipman is the center's executive director.
So we want them to have a personal connection, no matter who they are, to both history and to present. We also want them to feel inspired, that they can actually take a stand on whatever issue they want to.
The highlight is the King Papers collection. It's a rotating exhibit of some of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s personal writings on loan from his alma mater, Morehouse College.
These are handwritten speeches, sermons, his report cards from when he was a child, things that he carried with him throughout his life.
However, what is not on display is now at the center of a King family legal fight. Earlier this year, King's sons, Dexter King and Martin Luther King III, acting as board members of their late father's estate, sued their sister, Reverend Bernice King, after she refused to hand over their father's Nobel Peace Prize and traveling Bible. According to court documents, the potential buyer was the National Center for Civil and Human Rights.
Had the center attempted to purchase the Nobel Peace Prize and the traveling Bible?
We have had discussions over time about various things that they have that might be on display here or not, but there's never been an actual offer for anything.
Reverend Bernice King eventually turned over the items to the court. The siblings will be back in court in September.
It's a very good beginning.
Former Ambassador Andrew Young fought for civil rights alongside Dr. King. He sees the center as a vision for the future and the ongoing push for workers' rights, LGBT rights, and the global fight for women's rights.
This is a moving spiritual, artistic creation that will continue to be, developed to address the conflicts and the problems that we face today and in the future.
Victor Blackwell, CNN, Atlanta.
We have much more straight ahead in the newsroom, and it all starts right now. Hello again, everyone. I'm Frederica Whitfield. Welcome to the CNN Newsroom. This hour, a special in-depth look at the crisis in Iraq. Islamic militants are on the move, grabbing even more territory from the Iraqi army. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in the region talking about ways to contain the crisis.
This is a critical moment where together we must urge Iraq's leaders to rise above sectarian motivations.
Also this hour, new information on the mystery of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Officials re-examine the data and make a major announcement about the surge. Plus, World Cup showdown. A Team USA takes on Portugal at the World Cup in just 3 hours. We'll take you live to Brazil coming up. First up, our special report on the crisis in Iraq. Islamic militants known as ISIS are making significant gains in their efforts to take down Iraqi troops and take over strategic towns. 2 Iraqi security officials say ISIS now controls 70% of the western province of Anbar. 2 Iraqi security officials say ISIS now controls 70%, as you see on this map, among the towns they've captured. Rutba, just 70 miles from the borders of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. And there are no other towns or even cities between Rutba and the Iraqi checkpoint on the border with Jordan. Iraqi forces still have control of the checkpoint, but they are not sure how long they will be able to control the situation. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in the Middle East to discuss the ISIS threat and strategies to contain the crisis. We have correspondents and experts covering all angles of the story. Let's begin with Nick Robertson in Baghdad. So, Nick, what is the significance of these new ISIS victories?
Yeah, the significance is they now link their safe havens in Syria all the way to the outskirts of Baghdad, quite literally the suburbs of Baghdad, now linked to those weapons piles, to fighters by a main highway. They now control the Euphrates River Valley, and as we're seeing, they're using this to sweep more through Al-Anbar province. The town of Rutba, I've traveled through it many times over the past 20+ years. The next stop from there, 45 minutes drive away, is the Jordanian border, a tiny little Iraqi outpost on the border there, so that could fall anytime soon. This is, spreading the ISIS fighters closer to countries that have been outside of the fight until now, Jordan and Saudi Arabia, and also strengthening their hand in the country. They're solidifying their gains here, Frederica.
And then I understand there's new development involving ISIS action in the northern town of Mosul. What are we learning there about what's taken place?
Sure. One of the things that people have said ISIS is going to do is create these Sharia Islamic courts. We've seen photographs of them already executing people, even putting people through Islamic courts for thievery, cutting somebody's hand off, these sorts of things. They have these incredibly harsh their interpretation of Islamic edicts, and they are now applying them. They've told women that they have to cover up if they go out on the streets. They've told people that they can't smoke, they can't drink on the streets. But now they've gone another step further. They have destroyed statues, 3 statues in Mosul, a poet, a singer, and the Virgin Mary from a church. They have destroyed that. Now, this is incredibly negative, but people are saying this is what's going to split this military offensive, ISIS and the tribes, apart. So there's a way here. The tribes are supporting ISIS. They're not as radical as ISIS. Over these sorts of actions, a split might appear. And that is something certainly Western capitals are hoping and planning to try and help foster more of that, Frederica.
All right, Nick, hold tight there. Let's expand the conversation now and bring in a panel of experts in Washington. Ken Pollack of the Brookings Institution, CNN political commentator Charles Blow in New York, and retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling joining us from Orlando, Florida. First to you, General Hertling, how concerning is this to you that particularly in the town of Mosul, as you just heard Nick describing, that ISIS members are trying to set up Sharia law and already punishing people in a very brutal way?
This is their manner of operations, Frederica. This is to be expected when you have such an extremist group like this. And this could be what starts driving their supporters away from them. I mean, they've gained the confidence of some of the other Sunni tribal leaders who are disenfranchised with the Iraqi central government, who don't like the Shia domination of that government. But now, as you start to see the true portrait of ISIS coming out, I think you'll see perhaps some of those groups who are linked with them, whether it be a Sunni tribal group or, as we've seen in the news recently, Naqshbandi, a group of former Ba'athist officials in the town of Hawijas. They just won't put up with these kinds of things, but it will take some time before the splits begin to appear.
And then, Nick, one would, think that this setting up of Sharia law, this kind of punishment would further intimidate Iraqi armed forces. Is that likely what will happen next?
Sure, there's going to be an intimidation there, and certainly what we're finding now is that the Iraqi government is really pulling all of its troops out of the Sunni areas where they feel most threatened, and they're concentrating them, protecting the Shia areas, in particular the Shia shrines, because these radical ISIS Islamists are not going to stop at knocking down a couple of statues, even religious statues, Christian religious statues in Mosul. They would like to take down the the Shia shrines shrines in towns like Samarra, Baghdad, Kabul, and Najaf. These are hugely important shrines to millions of Shias in Iraq and in Iran. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims visit them. If they were to do that, that could trigger waves of sectarian bloodletting, because it is an absolute flashpoint for that sort of thing to happen here. So ISIS has only just begun. But as we heard General Hertling saying there, they're just potentially beginning this phase of separating, isolating themselves from this sort of support that they've had on the ground from the tribes, the Naqshbandi and other groups as well, Frederica.
And Charles, we've been talking the past couple days about part of the plan. The U.S. strategy is to send in U.S. military advisors. They're not even on the ground yet, particularly because Iraq hasn't signed the paperwork that still has to come, even though Iraq made the request. Now, given all of this territorial, takeover by ISIS, do you think this is now changing the strategy, the possible plans that the White House is considering?
Well, I think that part of sending in the 300 was in order to get more intelligence, right? So you can't really figure out what's happening on the ground using other people's intelligence. We have to have American intelligence on the ground. That was part of the strategy of sending people in, and it reserves the option for Americans to use things like targeted airstrikes or drone strikes. But you would want to do that with American intelligence. The last thing you would want to do is to make a mistake using targeted airstrikes, using someone else's intelligence, and then have America pay the PR costs for having done that. But I think the bigger issue here is what the general was hinting at before, and what I think the president has already hinted at, which is that the Iraqi people have to decide what kind of government they want and how they want the country to be set up and facilitated. And water kind of finds its level, and it has not found that level yet. And no matter how we want to impose our vision of democracy onto Iraq has to absorb that, and its military even has to absorb its own ethos. We can't even imbue a separate military with our own kind of set of character and bravery. We see that doesn't even work. You can't train them. You have to figure out who you're going to be, how brave you're going to be, who are you going to stand up to, and are you going to push these guys back on your own ground? This cannot be America's fight.
Well, Kenneth, it seems like things are out of order now, though. Doesn't it appear as though the Iraqi people can't even think about the next government, because right now they want someone to stop the bleeding?
Right. Well, I mean, let's be honest here. The Iraqi people have no say in this. This is about a leadership on both sides who are doing things that, quite frankly, the Iraqi people doesn't want. We've repeatedly seen the Iraqi people, whenever they've gotten the chance, they have voted in favor of democracy, in favor of peace, against sectarianism. The problem is what you see in these kinds of situations in Iraq in the past and in the present, but also places like Bosnia, like Syria, all these places, it's the leaders, it's the elites on both sides who have their own incentives for waging these fights. The Iraqi people didn't want Prime Minister Maliki to alienate the Sunni population. He did it for his own reason. The Sunni populace doesn't really want to fight Prime Minister Maliki. You heard General Hertling make the point that the Sunnis have a very big set of problems with groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They never wanted them. And remember, in 2007, when the United States was ready to assist them, we had the Anbar Awakening, and they threw off groups exactly like this. So the bigger issue is Iraq's leadership, and that's really what's come off the rails.
All right, we're going to talk more about this, gentlemen. Thanks so much. We're going to take a short break and continue this conversation about Iraq and what are the diplomatic options, if any, next. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is in the Middle East to talk about the threat from Islamic militants in Iraq and a diplomatic strategy to ease the crisis. Our Jim Sciutto is traveling with the Secretary. Jim, what is Kerry saying about the severity of the ISIS threat?
Well, Fred, I have to tell you, traveling with Secretary Kerry and other U.S. officials, you get a real sense of their sense of urgency and concern as this crisis grows in this part of the world. And there are two messages essentially that he is delivering as he travels from country to country. Egypt, now Jordan. There are other stops on the trip. One is that the U.S. and others want an inclusive government, that the leadership in Iraq has to make all the parties, the Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds, feel that they have a part and a voice in this government, which they have not felt for the last several years, part of the root of the problem. But the other message he has is that this is indeed a regional problem, not just an Iraqi problem, a Syrian problem, but a regional and possibly even further afield affecting Europe and the U.S. Here's how he described it today as he was in Cairo.
No country is safe from that kind of spread of terror. And none of us can afford to leave that entity with a safe haven, which would become a base for terror against anyone and all, not only in the region, but outside of the region as well.
No country is safe, a sobering warning. And we learned as we landed here in Amman, Fred, that ISIS had reached just within 70 miles of the Jordanian border. They're pushing up towards Syria, opening a corridor from Syria all the way down towards Baghdad and now Jordan. You know, every day you have a reminder of how this threat, as Secretary Kerry said, extends far beyond Iraq.
Oh, it does indeed. And so, Jim, do we know yet whether the military advisors have any legal protections yet to go into Iraq?
It's a remarkable question to be asking, and the fact is we don't have that answer yet. On Thursday, U.S. officials were saying they were confident that U.S. troops that are already on the ground in Iraq in the embassy compound, some of which are going to be retasked with this surveillance mission, they're okay. But that new troops were coming in, U.S. officials said they were confident the Iraqis would give them that protection. I asked Secretary Kerry today, do they have that protection? And I asked other officials, and they said it is still being worked out. Still a question to be worked out. They said they're working it actively, and they do believe the Iraqis will give it, because after all, it is the Iraqis who have asked for this help. Right. But still, several days after the president announced these troops going in, they don't have that legal protection. And remember, going back to the status of forces agreement, which was not achieved 3 years ago, that was the issue, immunity for U.S. troops in Iraq. And that was something the Iraqis did not grant at that stage.
All right, so it's a big question. Jim Sciutto, why is it taking so long? Let's expand this conversation now, especially on the diplomatic front, with our panel of experts in Washington. Ken Pollack of the Brookings Institution, CNN political commentator Charles Blow in New York, and retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling joining us via Skype from Orlando, Florida. So, Ken, to you first, what is taking so long? Isn't this strange, or is this worrisome to you? Iraq would ask for assistance, yet it's the Iraqi leaders who have to sign off on this piece of paper that we heard it described from the White House. It's just a matter of signing it, faxing it, and done. Why is it taking so long?
Well, first of all, the Iraqi bureaucracy is incredibly inefficient. It's entirely possible that's what's going on. Our former ambassador, Ryan Crocker, used to say everything in Iraq is very, very hard, and it's very hard all the time. Beyond that, the Iraqis may be trying to figure out exactly what they want these guys to see and not see. Obviously, Prime Minister Maliki would like help from the United States, but he wants it on his terms. And what he's been hearing from the Obama administration is an administration that isn't necessarily ready to simply let him do whatever he wants to do. For instance, I've got a very big question mark about what kind of a strategy we've agreed to with the Iraqis. I think the Obama administration wants our advisors to help them defend Baghdad. I suspect Prime Minister Maliki wants to drive into the Sunni areas, which would mean his troops and these Shia militias driving into the Sunni areas where there could be massacres, where there could be atrocities. You know, will our troops be involved in that? Those are some very big questions.
Big questions. And then, Charles, you know, Secretary Kerry is asking these leaders in the region to help push for a more balanced Iraqi government, more representative of Sunni, Shia, and Kurds. But we're even hearing from those countries that they're saying they're not even so sure they can trust the al-Maliki leadership. So we got a big problem here, don't we?
That's a huge problem, and I think that particularly from our perspective, or Western perspective, or American perspective, we often look for clear-cut good guys and bad guys. And in this case, it doesn't seem to be so clear-cut. In fact, you could look at it as choosing among lesser demons in a way, because there are no clean, good guys with clean hands. And that is one of the reasons that Americans are overwhelmingly opposed to re-engaging in any way in Iraq. And in fact, most Americans believe that what this current crisis is not the result of us having pulled out too soon, but the result of us having gone in the first place. And I think that getting over that hurdle, both here at home and in neighboring countries, about who can you trust, and if you go in, who is truly on your side, and is there a good guy to be found, and can you trust that person, is a real question that has to be asked and that people are asking around the world.
And then, General Hertling, will the diplomatic strategizing be equally, if not more important than the military strategy planning?
Absolutely, Frederica. That was our priority push in the North in 2007 and 8, and we were getting somewhere with that, as Ken Pollock will know, because he visited us a couple of times. But the criticality of mixing the diplomatic solutions with the military solutions that's the crux of the matter. To comment, though, on the issue of horrendous things in the future, they will happen. You have extremists in the Sunni areas, you have extremists in the Shia population. Bad things will happen, and that's one of the things that, as we take these 300 advisors and put them in harm's way, we have to consider, because they are going to be faced with a very tough mission. They are going to have Quds force potentially on their flank. They are going to have Shia militia. You are going to have Sunni tribesmen who fought with us at times. You're going to have, like we said before, Ansar al-Sunnah, all the various terrorist groups in the Naqshbandi. It is going to be a very confusing set of circumstances.
It will indeed, and it is already. General Mark Hertling, Charles Blow, Ken Pollock, thanks to all of you gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
While ISIS militants continue their deadly march across Iraq, innocent families are left behind. CNN's Michael Holmes talks to one family who says they have lost everything. That's coming up.